Welcome back to the last video in this series. In the previous videos, we have set up all the code and animations to get our player to hang off the side of the ledge and to even climb up on top of the ledge. However, if we have multiple ledges, our code will not work for all of them. So I'm going to start by making more ledges. If we click on our layout, anywhere on the layout, I'm going to go up here to the properties under size, and I'm going to change the width to 800 and the height to 640. So if I zoom out here, you can see our outline here has expanded beyond our normal work area that we've been working with. We do still have that dotted line right there. That's showing us the size of our viewport. That's going to stay the same. As for the background, we need to unlock that layer and select our background object, and I'm going to stretch him to cover all of that darker outline. And I'm actually, if we click on the layer, come over here and turn snap to grid on, now we can move it in 16 by 16 increments. That'll help us. And I'm going to go ahead and lock it back for now. We'll have to change it a little later. And on the player layer, I am going to take our ground object here and move it down to maybe right about there. I'm going to unlock our background layer again. And you see the line here? I want to go one full background square beyond it. Something like that. Okay, I'm going to lock it back. And now I'm going to move our ground object to about 3 blocks up. Now on the player layer, I'm going to move our player down towards the bottom to stand on the ground and start moving my ledges into place. Now because we have snapping turned on, my ledge triggers moved, or one of them did. And I'm actually going to move him over, maybe something like that. You can design your level however you want. You just want to make sure things are spaced out to where your player can get around the level and the ledge is high enough that she can't jump over them, but can reach the ledge trigger. So I'm going to move in and set this. I'm going to have to turn the snap to grid off and then move him over, something like that. And I'm going to go ahead and move him down 1 pixel on either side, just so we don't run into overlapping the trigger when we're on top of the ledge. Okay. Now I'm going to highlight the ledge and the ledge triggers and hold Control and click and drag out a copy. And I'm going to turn my snap to grid back on, highlight all those, move them something like that. And we can do the same thing with these ledge triggers after I turn the snapping off. And this can be a little meticulous. Nobody ever said game design is easy. So I'm going to add a few more ledges around the level. So this is what I've come up with. You can kind of use the checkered background as a guide to how things are spaced apart. I used a lot of snap to grid and then turning off snap to grid. It does take a few minutes to get set up. Set you something up. Yours doesn't have to look like this, obviously. Make it however you want. Just make sure that you test it out and things are spaced apart appropriately. I'm going to go ahead and play this. And right off the bat, we do have us an issue here. The way we get the view to center in on our player is using something in Construct 3 called Scroll To. However, I don't want to attach to our player. So with our player layer selected, let's double click and make a sprite. I'm going to resize mine to 16 by 16. And then I'm going to choose my circle tool, the ellipse, and a border thickness of 1 with a border, no fill. And you don't have to do this. This is just something I like to do as a visual representation. If we start in the top left, click and drag to the bottom right, we get us a circle. And then we can take our line tool and make some lines through the middle, left to right, and the middle up and down. And then I'll get us a white color, our paint bucket tool, and fill in these little areas. And we just have like a little target. And then I'll get the origin tool and make sure that it is in the middle. And we can exit out of that. With it selected, I'm going to rename it camera, drag it off to the side. Okay, with it still selected, let's go over here in the properties and edit behaviors, add new behavior, and down here under general, we have scroll to. Let's add that. And now if I drag this to our player and I play it, you can see if I come over here and jump around, nothing happens. It doesn't follow me. But our view is down here where we want it to start out. And if I drag it, say, over here and play it, now it's centered over here and you can see our player down there. So I'm going to drag this off to the side and go into our event sheet. I'm going to close up these groups just for right now. In our onStart of layout event, I'm going to set that position to our player. Add an action and go to camera and type in set position. And I want it to be at the player.x for the x value and the player.y for the y value, but that's going to put the view at the bottom of her feet. We can actually see what that looks like. And that looks okay for right now. We're going to have to change a few things, so we'll come back to it. Now I want it to follow our player. So I'm going to click on the onStart of layout event and add insert below and go into system. And every frame of the game, I want the camera to reset its position to where our player is. So every tick, which is every frame, I want to set the position of our camera to our player.x and our player.y. There we go. And you see what happened there? It's following the origin point, and then it snaps to the new origin point once we call for our idle animation. So if you've seen the last couple of tutorials I have put up on this channel, we used a lerp expression to give it a smoother fluid motion. So if I go into this and we change this to lerp and then we put some parentheses, it tells us we need 3 values. So the first value is going to be where our camera is. So camera.x and then a comma. The next coordinate is where our player is. So player.x, comma. And then the third value is the amount or speed in which we want it to move from one spot to the next. And I'm going to go with 0.1. It's a pretty safe number. And then down here, we'll do the same thing. Lerp, parentheses, from our camera.y, comma, to our player.y, comma, 0.1. And play that. And you can see that it takes just a little bit to catch up, and then it finally catches up to that origin point. Now, we still do have an issue here. I don't like the way this kind of snaps to it. It's a lot smoother than it was, but when I jump up and then I do the climb animation, it's kind of abrupt. I want the camera to follow the player as she climbs up. So to do that, we're going to follow a different point than just the player X and player Y. So let's open up our player object and go to the climb animation. And I'm going to create a new image point for our camera to follow. So let's right click over here and add new image point. And it gives it to us right in the middle there. I'm going to move this over to the top of her head. And I'm going to change that X to a 13. So there's a little consistency with our image point placement. So an X of 13 and a Y of 65. This is on the first frame. So the other frames don't have that image point on them yet. On that first frame, let's right click on the image point and apply to whole animation. So now we have that image point in the rest of our frames. So there's frame 1. Let's go to frame 2. I want this to stay kind of in that same location on her head for these first couple frames. So I'm going to move this up, and I think 53 for the Y and 15 for the X. Let's move to the next frame I'm going to move this up towards her head, and let's make that X a 20 and the Y 41. Let's move to the next frame, and I'm going to just kind of guess here. I think 30 and 30 looks good. Let's go to the next frame. Now here, I don't want to keep following her because by the time we get here, we've been following her kind of the top of her head. But if we followed her here, our image point would go out and then it would start coming backwards. And then by the time we hit the idle animation, it would be back up here. So I want to kind of work more towards that direction instead of out and then back in. Here was our last frame that we set. The next one, I'm going to move up from that point and over. I think maybe, let's go 33 for the X and Y for the 17. And then the last frame, I'm just going to move this into place somewhere up here. I'm going to say 35 for the X and 5 for the Y. Keeping an eye on our image point here from the first frame, it moves up and in a more fluid motion follows the player up and slightly over. So we've created that image point to follow our player with the camera. Now, if I go in here and I change this code to follow the player's image point, we're going to run into a problem when we switch animations. So let's go ahead and go in here and make that change first. So we have our lerp expression from the camera's X position, that's fine, to the player's X position. I want to access that new image point that we made. So instead of player.x, I'm going to erase the X and type in image point X. And then in parentheses, I want that new image point that we created, which was image point 1, because the origin point is image point 0. The new one we just added is image point 1. And then we have a comma and our value of 0.1. So same thing down here. Instead of to player Y, let's erase the Y and type in image point Y, and in parentheses, add image point 1. Okay? Now, back in our player, we set up to follow this image point, but in idle, run, and jump, and hang, we don't have that same point to follow. So I'm going to create it. So on idle, let's add a new image point, and I'm going to go to the top and put 13 for the X, and it'll be 0 for the Y. And then I'll go to run, and I'll do the same thing. Right-click, add a new image point to the very top, 13 for the X, 0 for the Y. And since we have multiple frames, we can come over here, right-click, apply to whole animation. Now they all have that brand new image point, and it's different from our origin point. Now to jump, let's right-click, add a new image point, put it up here at the top. And actually for the jump, we have this extra space here because her arms reach further than the top of her head in this animation. I'm going to keep it at the top of her head. And 13 for the X and 5 for the Y looks good. I'm going to right-click on that, apply to whole animation. Both frames have it now. And same thing with the hang. I'm going to right-click, add a new image point, put it at the top of her head, at 13 for the X, 5 for the Y. We now have that image point 1 on all of our frames of animation. So now, this will always be following that image point on the X and Y axis. So since that new image point is at the top of her head, we can go back up here to our initial set position and change that player Y to -65. That'll put the camera at the top of her head to start off, and then it'll just follow her from there. Let's see what that looks like. Nice motion. And then if we jump up and do our climb, it follows us smoothly. Nice. Now that we have that out of the way, if we click on our camera object in the project panel, scroll down in the properties towards the bottom, and it says initially visible. Let's untick that so it won't show on screen. And then let's pick ledge trigger in our project panel, scroll down in the properties and do the same thing, initially visible, untick it. And I'll just play that real quick. And you see none of that stuff's there, but it still works. All right, so a problem that we have now that we have all of these new ledges and ledge triggers all over the place, we know our code works on this ledge, right? But what happens if I try to do it on another ledge? It's all over the place, right? Even on this ledge, it's just teleporting me all over the place. That's because we're telling it to set its position to ledge X and ledge Y, its origin, which is at the top left of each one of these ledge objects. Well, this was the first one we created. The engine is defaulting because it doesn't know what's what. It's just defaulting to this one. We want it to figure out the difference between each ledge object. So in our event sheet, in our functions, we can easily fix this problem. In our facing left parameter here, if we highlight the whole block there and press B to create a sub-event underneath facing left, we can now check to see which ledge we want to run this code on. So let's double click to go into that sub-event, and let's grab our ledge, and I'm going to start typing in pick, P-I-C-K, and we have a few different options here. We can pick the highest or lowest instance variable, which we don't have on that object, pick by unique ID, or pick nearest and furthest. I want pick nearest or furthest. And I want to pick the nearest object to the X and Y point of where our player is. So for the X, I'm going to type in player.x, and for the Y, player.y. Now, to reassure that it is the one closest to where our player is, I'm going to tell it to get that Y coordinate, which is at her feet, and come all the way up to where her hands would be whenever she latches on to hang off of a ledge. So we're going to subtract the Y value for the full height of the sprite. And we've been using that -65. I think that'll work here. So when this function gets called, and the parameter has been set to left, then it's going to pick the nearest of this ledge object that is nearest to our player's origin. And then we can run this code. So let's highlight all of this code and move it down into this block. So now it will run this code for each individual ledge that we are nearest to. So come down here to the facing right parameter, highlight it, B on the keyboard for a sub-event, and we can actually just copy this, highlight it, control, click, drag a copy down to this part, because we want to do the exact same thing here. And then we can move this piece of code down into here. You should have something that looks just like this. Let's play that. Now, that ledge, that ledge, that ledge, and from the other direction, that ledge, and everything works. All right. Okay, that should set us up for the code. I'm going to close that. I'm going to do one more little thing back on our layout, just as an added bonus. I am going to zoom out a little. One of the things, if I play this real quick, our camera follows us up and down and left and right, but when we get to the side here, it's only up and down that it follows us, and we get to the side of the screen. I just think it looks kind of weird. But to kind of break that up, what we can do is if we click on the background layer and bring up its properties, in the parallax, we can go, instead of 100% for our X and Y, I'm going to go 80, 80. And that will give us this parallaxing effect in the background, which I like. I think it looks pretty cool. However, whenever we come all the way to the edge, we still have it where our character ends up on the side of the screen. If we click on the layout itself to bring out the layout properties, we have unbounded scrolling over here. If we check that, it will no longer bound the scrolling. However, the problem is our background runs out. but it's kind of cool to see where the values end up from the left and the right. So we can clean this up a little bit if we unlock our background layer and select our background object. I'm going to just stretch this out. I'm going to use that checkerboard design as a guide to go, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's go 7. And then same thing over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then down here, we can just pull this down. I don't know, something like that. And then up at the top, do the same thing. Make sure that we have the background covering plenty of area so that we don't see the black beyond the background sprite. And then just to clean it up a little more, we can take this ground sprite. I'm going to lock that background layer. And then take our ground sprite, click it, and drag it down. I don't know, something like that. That's probably good enough. And then maybe pull it out an extra square's worth and do the same thing with these. And we can actually move those all the way to the top. And I'll go ahead and move that down. All right. Let's see what we got. I think that looks a little better. Not bad for just using colored blocks. Just plain colored squares and rectangles. But there it is. A pretty smooth working mechanic to hang and climb up with no interruption in our animation frames. And we don't get stuck in other states. So, there you go. I hope you enjoyed this mechanic. I hope you were able to learn something from it. I certainly did. I ran into a few bugs along the way, and it took me about a week longer than I originally intended on working on this, but finally got it figured out. All right, that's going to do it for this series. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please go hit that subscribe button. Hit that like button while you're at it. That's going to do it for me on this one. Make sure you're saving your project often, and I will see you in the next one.